Thanks, Igor. Yeah, what's a conference without a good Dilbert? So I thought but it doesn't have anything to do with the talk, except for the word strategic. Now, today I want to talk to you guys about strategic DDD for developers, and you get to find out why. First, briefly who I am, Sven Vintges, CTO at Stacks, together with Berko and Sietse. Company, very briefly, it's about making it easier to build better software. And from our vision, this is mainly driven from a business perspective. So it's not about code, it's not about using tools. Also the whole AI hype, which is really, really interesting. But from my perspective, that's not really the main problem. So it's about programmers losing jobs and stuff like that, but that's not really the core of our profession. The core of our profession is designing the correct software for the business. We did a little talk this morning about my stacks and business processes, but today I want to talk you a little bit through concepts from DDD, domain-driven design, how you can apply them, especially strategic concepts, and how they translate to code bases. First, everybody is asking, at least the companies I've been working, why is this software so expensive? And most of the time, it's not about writing the code, right? You write some code, takes a day, takes a week. But often it's all these people talking about software, making decisions, or looking at it from a business perspective or technology perspective, not writing the correct code. So, and that's basically what the people from the business are seeing. Okay, I've spent like millions of dollars, and now I have this product. It doesn't really suit my needs. So how can it be this bad if I pay like $1 million? If I pay it for a car, I have an excellent Lamborghini or something, but now I have software that's not working. So that's the main question. How can you basically build better software using the concepts of the big blue book? I don't know who knows this book. Okay, you can leave the room now. It's from Eric Evans, Domain-Driven Design, a bit low res. But basically there are some principles in this book, which I think it's from 2008, still very relevant. And it states complexity should be at the heart of the software system. And the complexity is the business complexity. So we need to grasp this business complexity in our code. Often when I encounter code bases, they are very sophisticated from a technology perspective, like they have Django signals, or they have this very interesting fast API with dependency injection, or a Spring Boot with all kinds of stuff, Kafka going on, whatever technology, which are really awesome from an engineering perspective. But I don't see the business resembling in the code base. So that's one of the key principles I want to emphasize on today. How do you get like this business domain in your code base? Another important thing is collaboration with domain experts. I'm going to show you today how this can be done, which strategic instruments you can apply to have discussions with people in the domain. Make the complexity visible, so make it visible also in your code base if it's there, and try to iterate. And that's what we're going to do, or try to do today, hopefully, because there's a little experiment with some live designing in here. I hope it's going to work, but we'll see. So today I want to provide you with some knowledge about these strategic parts of DDD. As many people know, and I will also touch them briefly, the tactical parts of DDD, which I'll talk about later. Play around with these tools, do some live designing, so basically design it together, and also see how can you use it in your code base. So how can you use these tools right in your code, make better code, which lasts like for decades and still resembles the business without getting into all these technical details. So I thought about starting a business, and I thought about, okay, we're at a conference, so let's decide about a business model, but it's already there, so I'll just copy paste it. Let's do Pygrunn. Let's design a system for Pygrunn, share some Python knowledge, and have fun. That's the goal of Pygrunn mainly. Get all together, share knowledge, have some fun. But in order to do so, there are some big steps along the way, and Berko has been doing it a long time. It's hard work behind the scenes, but it needs to be done. You need to find your speakers, sell your tickets, find your sponsors, arrange a venue, and attract sponsors. So talking to these guys, they're talking in these terms. This is what needs to be done. They're not talking about Kafka. They're not talking about fast API or Django. They don't care about it. They do, of course, but from the conference perspective, a little bit. Doesn't know anything about it. No. So, but this is from a business perspective, what needs to be done. So I want to introduce basically 3 concepts. I don't know if you've heard about it, but who knows about ubiquitous languages? Have you ever heard this term before? Couple of raised hands. Bounded context. Yeah, probably the people who've read the book. And the context map, also the same people. Okay, but a lot of people who haven't heard about these 3 concepts. So they're really focusing on looking at your software and the software you're developing from the business perspective and a more, what I like to call, strategic perspective. So first of all, the domain language. So, and this is basically the same as the ubiquitous language. It's the language we all try to talk when we reason about the system. So you have like the analyst, you have like Berko as a business owner and domain expert about conferences. You have me as the guy trying to do some design, but you also have the developers writing the code. And they all need to have like this same understanding of the domain. So I thought about typing out these tickets, but that would be kind of a hassle. So one of the, there are a couple of concepts in the ubiquitous domain, and how you would talk about this is like, okay, we have to sell some tickets. We need talk reviews. Okay, talk reviews. Why do you need talk reviews? Let me see where talk is. Like I said, some live stuff going on here. It should be here somewhere. So we've talk reviews, which we need, and we have a talk somewhere. Okay, gonna make it. That's also the fun thing about doing this. So we have like this talk. So while talking to each other, we're basically defining this domain or ubiquitous language which we all come to understand. So we have this talk, Ah, man. Okay, I'm going to stop now. I'm going to have some beers because I'm done. It's one of the, no? Okay, I'll say. Okay, we need talks, we need speakers. They need to present the talk basically. Oh, the speakers need to have a room to provide the talk. So we're talking about rooms here. Okay, we need people to attend. So we have a guest list. And okay, we want to have a review about speakers, for example. So we introduced this concept of speaker reviews. We need the location, which is excellent, I think, here at the forum. Rooms, but we also need like time slots. And okay, we want to keep the prices of the tickets low, so we need some concepts like sponsors. And oh, by the way, these tickets need to be paid, and the sponsors need to pay their money. So we have some concepts of payment. So during the talk with the business, this basically evolves during the talk, and you can do it like this. I'm using MyRoad for this presentation, which is a collaboration platform, but there's an even better solution. But I'll wait to the end to introduce that product to you guys. So you work on this together, you can design it, and you can have like a discussion about your business domain together with the people of the business. And that's really fundamental in designing software. And that's often what's lacking from my perspective and the perspective as a company. We're seeing like we're so focused on technology, but we're basically every now and then missing the point that we're doing it for the business, and the business people should understand what we're doing. So now we've created this big ubiquitous language. It's like, okay, we have this big system, but okay, this is for conference system. You can kind of grasp the big ideas, but if you grow like into an enterprise system, then you have to divide all these different concerns and verbs into separate contexts, and I'm going to explain why. So for example, I found this very interesting tweet. I thought, okay, this is basically what we're talking about. Context is king. But what he's saying here, when a politician greets you with "How are you?" and a nurse greets with "How are you?" they are totally different questions, even though they sound and are spelled the same. You know from the context what they mean, what the politician means or what the nurse means. They're basically saying the same thing, but they're asking a different question. And this is also what we're trying to achieve with the bounded context. So we have all these different concepts, and what we're trying to do is to create contexts where definitions have a meaning which is very precise for that context. So for example, I have an account in the registration system, and that's basically your account for registration. That's your email address, your name probably, and that's it. But I also have this concept of account in the payment system, but it's something completely different. That's the account in the general ledger where you want to keep track of the funding, for example, of the conference. So it's the same name, but a completely different meaning. If we would design the system without these bounded contexts, so without basically introducing these domains of words, we would just have one entity account. And that's often what you see in big enterprises. When designing a system, you have like this big vocabulary, which which you want to use for all the departments of the business, and have this concept account. Okay, but what is an account? It could be an account for funding, it could be an account for registration of a user in a system. So by dividing this into bounded contexts, or what we would like to call domains, you get like the definition of a specific word is fit to that specific domain. But also you have other concepts like a ticket. A ticket is, in the payment system, you want to know, is this ticket, has it been paid for example, so people can access. But here, you want to know what type of ticket is it. Is it a crew member, is it a speaker, or is it on the guest list, or is it just a regular ticket we're selling here? What's the pricing? Maybe you have different types of tickets. So it could be a completely different concept, but also the same name. But in this case, they're linked together. You want to know if the ticket has been paid and what the pricing is of the ticket. So I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. And also the same for sponsors, as the sponsor paid the money for sponsoring. And in the conference, yeah, we have to tell about the sponsor, right? So if you have like these different contexts, then the next thing there are a couple of things you can do with it. So you have these domains. These domains have particular functionality from your organization. And there are a couple of things you can do with integration. So as I've shown in the previous slide, they have to talk to each other, for example. You have the ticketing system with the tickets and the payment system where also you have a ticket. So you want these domains to talk together. You want to have them exchange data. So, and I'm not going to go into very much detail about it, but there are multiple strategies in the way you can let these domains communicate with each other. So you can define a partnership. A partnership means these two domains working together. They closely work together, and there's constantly talking about which features to release, for example, and constantly meeting with each other, deciding when can I release a new feature. And they are basically in sync. You can also use a model that's called a shared kernel, and that basically means you have a library you share between two teams, and you commit it in a central repository. You get it from both systems, and they have like the same code base they're working on with the domain concepts. And another very interesting, because we're often using it without knowing it, is the open host services. That basically is like how we use Open API at the moment in the world. And basically what this says is, okay, I'm a domain and I am exposing some services to you guys, like a payment system. You can pay for a ticket. Then you provide an API and you don't know anyone who's connecting to your service. So basically you're saying, this is my Open API spec, you can use it, and you just know nobody who's using it. It's just public APIs, and everyone can use it. And so by defining these different contexts, you can also define how these should integrate and who should be, do you want to share a kernel? Do you want to discuss on feature releases? Do you want the one to comply to the contract and the features of another domain? But another more interesting thing you can do with these domains is you can strategize on how you want to implement these domains. So this is from a guy who's really, I think, built some nice tools for it. What you can do here is you have like, you have your domain, and the conference, that's basically the core domain. This is where Pygrunn is about. This is what makes Pygrunn unique. It's a conference, right? But payment, for example, that's something that a lot of organizations do. You have to get your money in or your money out. So along these lines, you can say like, okay, I have a differentiation for my business. So it's like a core domain, like in our case, a conference, or for a bank, maybe a banking system. That, depending on the company, you can decide, okay, where do I want this to be? Do I want it to be a core system? Do I want to be a supporting system? So it is differentiating for the business, but not that much, or a generic system like a payment system. And by this you can decide, for example, should I buy this software, or should I build it myself? And then especially when it's your core domain, it's really close to the strategy of your business. So the conference and the conferencing system in this example is very near to the business and the differentiating products and services of the business. So that's something you may want to have close to your organization, build yourself. As where the payment system, that's more generic. Everyone can build it, can buy it, has to use it. So that's something you may want to buy or use it as a software as a solution, software as a solution approach. And there's some other stuff you can do with it. For example, if you have an existing landscape, so it's not all meant to be greenfield. You could have like, I've worked at a couple of large companies. You have this existing code base and you have to make decisions about, okay, where should I invest my money in terms of migration, technology innovation, business innovation. And you can use those same domains. So how differentiating are they? How complex are they to migrate? And then you can decide, okay, I should, if it's core to my business and my future business, I should be maybe a little bit more risk seeking, try to push the boundaries of technology and business innovation as to where it's not really differentiating and it's not really complex to migrate. You can just build a migration street and get project management on there and all kinds of tool gates. So you can also decide the strategy on how you want to handle them in your application landscape. Moving back a little bit, so these are the domains, but also a different aspect, and then I promise you I'm going to get to some code very soon. You have like your processes of the business. We had a talk about it this morning, so I'm not going to dive very much into it, but what you basically want to do is you also want to, you have like your data, your domain model, but you also have behavior in your organization, which you express through business processes. Okay. If you have like this done, so you have your domain model, which your ubiquitous domain model, you have like all these different domains, then the next step is, okay, get it into the code. So we now have this understanding of the business, and we want to get it into code. So we have, and if you've read the book, you know these concepts, but there are a couple of concepts which are very suitable to translate this into your code base from the book. And one of them is the domain services. Those are for more complex, and I'll show a little bit about it in the code, cross-aggregate operations. So I've shown you this business process over here. It's going to do multiple things. It's going to create an account. You're going to subscribe. You have to pay your ticket. You have to go to the conference. You will visit talk. You will review talks, right? So you've seen that I'm hitting quite some components from the domain model here. So it's across multiple elements of the domain model. We have repositories. That's for fetching, storing, and querying the data. So when you're working your domain model, you want to have the data. Could be either in a database, could be an external service, could be in any file. We don't want those concerns into our domain model because we want to focus on the business. So that's why we have the concept repositories. I'm going to show a little bit how that's going to work in the code base. And you have the aggregate roots, which is the main aggregate to these main entities. Those are what we like to call a consistency boundary. So that means if you manipulate an aggregate root or an aggregate, you have like in the classical database sense, you have like a transaction. It starts, you manipulate, and you anti-transaction, and the whole system should be consistent. And you have like entities which are long-lived, have an identity. So it could be, for example, a person with an ID, with a name and an address, and it stays in the database for quite some time, and you want to fetch it by an ID. And you have value objects, and I'm rushing a little bit through it, but I'm going to show it in some code, which are equal by value. So there's nothing to do with an identity. If it has the same data in it, then it's equal. So I'm going to, let me see how I'm doing on the time. 5 more minutes. So a little bit about designing. So we have like, the next thing you want to do is you have all these concepts from your domain model. And what you want to do is design these aggregates. And these aggregates are, this step is important to switch to the code. So I'm going to do one example. So I've written the attendee, and what I want to do is, okay, if I have a talk, okay, what's involved in a talk? Okay, in a talk we have a speaker, for example. So I'm telling this in my design, I'm saying, okay, a talk has a speaker, it's being held in a room, and it may be held in a time slot. And what do we have here? And yeah, that's basically it for a talk, I guess. And now we have like this, okay, these 4 elements, and if I go to the next one, for example, I want to do room. A room will have a talk, but it will have multiple talks. So what I'm doing here is and this is something you will do together with the business. It will have multiple talks. So the interesting thing here is the next step, what you want to do is, okay, you want to decide if it's an aggregate. This means you have like a room and you can add talks to it. So I'm saying here, okay, I have a room, this is my aggregate, I can add talks to it. But these talks, they're over here and they have a speaker and they have a time slot. So what I'm saying here is, okay, the data of the talk should be in the room. But I don't want the data of the talk to be in the room, right? Because I want to change this talk by itself. If I would do it like this, I would always have to say to the system room.talk.talk1, for example, change title, and you can change the title. But the the talk by itself can be changed. You can change the title of the talk. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce a reference. So this talk will be a reference using a talk ID, which will be a attribute, and in DDD that's a value object, so it will become a orange post-it, and then you can have multiple of these IDs, for example. And this is something you can do by yourself and with the business, discussing, okay, how does it work? How does it work together? And then you're basically building from the strategy where you have like find speakers, we need the speakers, we need the talks, then you're creating your domain model, then you're creating like this structure a little bit more detailed about, okay, how are we going to persist the data? And the next step is that you can very easily move this into a code base that even the business can understand. So what I've done here is the bounded context I've just shown you, or conference management, or payment, registration, ticketing. I'm building these exactly the same elements are getting back in my code base. So in my code base I have like, conference management, and I haven't developed anything about it, but from it, I did for conference management, of course. But for payment, for example, I did not write any code, but this is a service by itself. You can deploy or you can buy or whatever you want to do with it. And the conference management, which is our core domain, so that's why I decided to invest some time, is also being structured by the whole business. So the heart, and that's one of the principles I explained at the start of the talk, is complexity in the business domain should be at the heart of the software system. So that's why in the code base you see this domain, which also has the speaker, and the speaker has its models. And if I open it, then I see, okay, I have this speaker ID, which is the value object, so we can reference to it from, for example, the talk. We have the speaker, and the speaker has its identity, its name, email address, biography, whatever, and I can write a review for a speaker. So what I'm doing here basically is I'm getting these domain objects also directly from the talks with the business into my code base. But also I have like behavior, which also is known by the business, like I want to write a review for a speaker in the code base. So the fun thing is, what I always like to say, if I'm sitting with someone from the business, he or she should be able to understand what's in the code. So they can read what's happening here, and you can reason about it. You could even sit with them together in the code base. So you don't see any technology stuff in here. And of course there's technology involved. For example, the API, we will create a different layer. So the domain is the core. That's never going to change. But if you need infrastructure, let's say I want to build a fast API layer in front of it, I can build it in the API layer, and it will reference these objects from the domain. It will not have any domain code in it, so it has no logic and knowledge about the business. It will just reference, for example, if I need an endpoint to write a review via REST, I will write a fast API a service which just exposes this specific method. If in the next phase I want to add GraphQL, I can just add a GraphQL query layer in front of it and use the same method without changing the business logic. And that's often what's happening in larger code bases. We're duplicating all this business logic in specific technologies, but by bringing this really close to the heart of your software system and getting all these business concepts at the core, you can just easily extend technology. And then that's the moment you start building a system which is understandable by the business, but also lives for like decades, because it's holding the concepts, the core concepts of the business. And whenever technology changes, unless the whole Python, you decide to move away from Python, which you obviously wouldn't and shouldn't do. But if you introduce Fast API, you use Fast API. If you want to use Flask, you can use a Flask frontend. If you want to store it in a database, use SQL Alchemy. If you want to yes, let's say this is a high volume system because we're very popular with the conference and we have a high load, and you want to have like speaker and speaker review separated in different microservices. You can just split out these different modules. So make this a top level project with its own deployment and the repository. For example, I believe it's this one. Find a review by the speaker, which refers to the speaker. It will not do a database join anymore, but it will do a call to a other REST service to get the information about the speaker. So this way you can also scale your code base in the long run. So, so what I've basically done during this talk is I've got this business strategy, business concept, designed about, okay, what's the domain model? What are the different domains? How do they work together? And then make a very smooth step, I believe, into, okay, and how does it work in your code base? So now all the business stuff I've been doing at the start of the talk, it's now really resembling in the code base. And this is how we work at Stacks as well. And this is also part of the vision. So I've been doing it in Miro now, but I'm of course going to do a shameless plug. We're also building this MyStack system, which also has these different, good screenshot with an empty process. These different concepts in here with the domain model and the processes, which you can collaborate with the business and also use and couple to your code base. But that's for a later time. So that's basically what I wanted to share with you guys about how can I get from this business concept, so the Pygrunn conference, which is here, which we started with in like, I think it's 20 minutes, to this code base, which is, just exactly resembling the conference. And questions?
Thank you very much, Sven. Are there any questions from the audience? Jan.
Jan and Jan.
Well, I have a question. So you're talking about you're talking with the business in business terms, right?
Yeah.
But I see that at the end you introduce a technical term like an ID.
Yeah.
So it might be useful, but how does the business react to that when you do that?
So the question is, you talk about the domain model, then in the end you introduce some technical aspects like an ID, and how does the business react on that?
I'll talk into this one. Basically depends a little bit on who you're talking with in the business, but as you may imagine, it's you can, even if you don't know anything about software, you can get the concept of I'm referencing to something or I'm manipulating something. And that's basically what you're doing here. And ID is kind of technical, but on the other hand, everyone has a social security number and they get the concept of a number which you can use to reference and a unique identity. So in that sense, it's even if though it seems like a technical concept, it's very close to how we talk about data in the real world. So it's not really that big of a gap. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Thanks. I had a question here.
Yes, say you have an existing code base, and that's heavily architected around the framework instead of around the business. So how would you approach migrating it from a framework architecture to more generic architecture like you have shown us?
Yeah, great question. So, should I repeat?
No,
it's done. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now I'm confused. Should repeat it? Oh, man. What I often believe works best is to take it an approach on like a business process or feature by feature and get it out of the current framework code base, get it into the new code base and write some glue code from the old framework way of setting up to the new way of setting up your system. And to be honest, that's quite hard because often if you work from a framework perspective, you're not working from the business perspective. So if you have to be very careful about where should I really have the hooks to the new system and how should I have that working. So it would be my approach to do it process by process. And it's kind of hard to do it. It's called the Strangler pattern, basically by Martin Fowler, as he mentioned it on his website. And it's like you're building the new system on top of the old system and getting it piece by piece to the new architecture.
Time for a last question. You can go ahead first.
I was wondering if I see a lot of similar things on this board, and I'm not completely familiar with the domain-driven design, but we just say that responsibility principle, or would it be beneficial? Because I see some domain entities
Mhm.
drip into the code, and
Yeah, I think
So the question was, does it interfere, right? I tried to rephrase it, right? Does domain-driven design interfere with the single responsibility?
pattern.
Yeah, pattern.
Yeah, even with this, I think you can also do it, but from a business perspective. So what should be the responsibility of the talk, for example? It should be, okay, it should keep track of the description, for example, and yeah, maybe that's the big part of the talk. So that's then the responsibility of the talk class, or maybe, yeah, let me see if I can make up another example right now, but that's also something you can discuss with the business in this this particular setup. Why it looks like there's a lot of duplication, that's because I'm halfway the design. So for example, you see room on multiple places now. In the end, you want to have one aggregate which is responsible room and for the consistency of the room, and the other should reference that aggregate. So that's basically what the whole exercise is when it's done.
I think there was one other person looking for a question. Yeah, Dominique.
I was wondering how you would do this for internal systems, internal code bases.
How would you do?
So
Yeah. How would you do this for internal code bases, right? This was the question. Yeah.
And maybe, do you have an example of an internal? What do you mean specifically?
For example, your platform
Mhm.
that is probably that's made by code.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Like with whom do you talk about the different aggregates, or how do you implement it then? Because I do understand that when you actually build something for the business,
Mm-hmm.
but when you build something for your own company, like
Yeah, let's say you build, okay, the question is how do you do this? How do you use it for an internal platform? So let's say you have like this application delivery platform or a continuous delivery platform, stuff like that. I think the result will be different in terms of the code, but the talk can be the same. It's not the business you're talking to, like the finance department, but you're talking to the engineers. So what do you need? So for example, about 10 years ago, I was working in the ministry. And we're making this standard platform, and we're discussing with the engineers, what do you need to become better at developing software? How can you make it faster in terms of delivery to production, or make the quality better in terms of automated tests? What do you need? But that, and basically you can grasp the same concept, because also software development, for example, it's a process in the end with requirements and software running in production. But it's becoming a little bit meta if you do that, of course. But you can take the same approach from my perspective. Only, the business is engineers in this case. Does it answer your question? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sven. We're recycling your present and give him an applause.